I grew up in hell, and they dared to call it love. I wore the clothes my brother threw away, ate the scraps they left behind, and was told I should be grateful. Every moment of my childhood was a reminder that I was invisible, replaceable, disposable. And now, years later, I finally built a life of my own, a beach house by the ocean paid for with my sweat and my silence. The first time my family came to see it, my mother didn't say she was proud. She looked around and whispered, "This would be perfect for your brother's family." I just smiled and made one phone call. But before I share my story with you, I'd love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments so I know you're listening, or let me know where you're watching from. I love to see how far my story can reach. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. My name is Torin Lockmerrick, and if you feel even a piece of my story in your heart, please don't forget to subscribe. It means more than you know to know this voice is finally being heard. The late afternoon sun slanted across the porch, spilling through the tall glass doors into my kitchen. The sound of the waves was steady calm like a heartbeat against the shore. I stood at the island counter of my beach house in the Outer Banks, slowly pouring hot water into the pot of tea I'd prepared. The place smelled faintly of salt and wood polish, a scent that carried the quiet promise of something I had built on my own. This house had once been a storm-battered wreck. I had spent months repairing it, sanding the floors, replacing windows, scraping off rot until it breathed again. Not one call, not one visit from my family during that time. No congratulations when I signed the deed, no word of pride when I hauled this house back from ruin. Now for the first time they were here. My mother Lorraine, my older brother Beau, his wife Savannah, and their daughter Margot sat out on the deck as if they were waiting for service. Through the glass I could see them stretched out in the late sun. Savannah lounged with her phone in hand, legs crossed on my chaise like it belonged to her. Beau's face carried that casual entitlement I knew too well, the kind of look that said the world would eventually fold itself to his needs. Margot was the only one who didn't know any better, small and bright-eyed at 7, holding her stuffed dolphin while she pointed out seashells stuck in the deck's woodwork. Not one of them had said, "Well done." Not one. "We're proud of you." Instead, their eyes wandered across the space as if measuring walls, calculating value, inspecting an asset. My mother's gaze moved slow and precise fingers, brushing the edge of the window frame as if she were appraising it for someone else. I placed the cups on a tray, gripping my chipped teal mug tightly, the one relic I had carried from the house I grew up in. Its handle was cracked. The paint faded, but it was mine, the only thing from that childhood that hadn't been given to me secondhand. I carried the tray outside, set it on the low table between them. Lorraine didn't even look up as she said, "This place is perfect for Beau and Savannah. You're living here alone, Torin. It's too much house for just you." She didn't say it as a suggestion. She said it like a decree. The old rhythm of silence tugged at me, the rhythm where I swallowed my words and let them step over me. But my hand around the mug tightened. Inside me, something hard and sharp pressed back. I smiled a smile they wouldn't understand and placed my phone on the armrest beside me, the screen already open on Hollis Crane's number. I didn't press call, not yet. The evening sun painted the ocean in gold, and I thought, this visit isn't about tea. It never was. Margot's voice broke the heavy quiet. "Look what I've found," she cried, holding up a spiral seashell still damp with salt. She beamed with pride, her curls catching the sun. For a moment I saw a flash of innocence untouched by the games the adults played. I smiled at her, but inside the shell pulled me backward in time, back to the days when I was her age, and innocence meant being handed less and told it was enough. I remembered my 14th birthday. It fell on a Wednesday. There was no celebration, no balloons, no friends invited over. That night my parents carried out a cake. Half of it had already been eaten. I knew where it came from Beau's party the weekend before. His name had been scraped off with a knife, and mine was scrawled across the top in uneven frosting, hurried and careless. I forced a smile clapped when they lit a crooked pink candle. Inside, I felt hollow. I didn't dare complain. Gratitude was demanded of me even for scraps. That was the language of my childhood leftovers passed off as blessings. Back on the deck, I mentioned it quietly. I still remember the birthday cake with Beau's name scraped off. That was mine, wasn't it? My mother's response came swift and sharp. Don't start playing the victim, Torin. You should have been grateful you even had cake at all. Not everyone gets that much. The words landed the way they always had, with the weight of dismissal. But this time something shifted. The silence that once smothered me now carried an edge. I placed my mug down the sound, a small punctuation against her accusation. Then Beau spoke, his voice low but steady, like he had rehearsed it. I lost my house, Torin. Foreclosure. We don't have anywhere to go. Savannah's eyes stayed on her phone, but I saw the way her jaw tightened, the way her thumb stopped scrolling for half a second. And then Lorraine added the piece that snapped everything into place. That's why we're here. This house is too much for you. It's the solution for them. There it was. The real reason. Not pride. Not love. Just need dressed up as entitlement. The air around us grew heavy, the same kind of heaviness I had known since childhood when Beau got the first slice of everything. And I got what was left when my voice was brushed aside, when my existence was defined by how much I could give away. Except now at 31 in my own home with the deed in my name, I recognized it for what it was. This wasn't family visiting. This was the old script rewritten on new walls, and I was done playing the part they wrote for me. The scent of tea drifted between us, warm and harmless, but it couldn't soften the weight of the silence. Savannah set her phone down for the first time, her eyes gliding across the beams of the ceiling and the polished wood floors, as if she were about to compliment me. But instead, her voice carried that delicate edge of condescension. You've always been so stable, Torin. Nothing ever rattles you. You don't know what it feels like to struggle the way we have. A house this size, wouldn't it make sense to share it with family? Her words fell with practiced sympathy, but beneath it was an expectation as old as my childhood. My hand tightened around my mug, and before I could respond, the memory came back uninvited, sharp as salt in an open wound. I was 16 again. My guidance counselor, Mr. Hansen, had called me into his office. His smile had been kind, steady, his desk cluttered with pamphlets and college brochures. He told me I'd been chosen for the college prep summer program. It was competitive, selective, and free. He said I had potential resilience, a mind worth shaping. I remember how my chest swelled with a hope I'd never dared to name. All it needed was a parent's signature. I had rushed home that afternoon, papers clutched in hand, heart pounding with possibility. I'd imagined myself spending weeks on a college campus learning, preparing for something greater. But when I showed my mother, she didn't even skim the form. She shook her head and said, "He's not college material. He needs to stay home and help with the house. That's what's practical." Beau had been leaning in the doorway, smirking, tossing a baseball up and down. He's scared of crowds anyway. He freezes in front of people. Not exactly leadership material, right? His laugh filled the kitchen, casual and cruel, while my dream dimmed in the space between them. I didn't argue. I folded the paper, slipped it into my backpack, and told Mr. Hansen the next day that my family couldn't make it work. I never spoke of it again. That was the summer I learned that being invisible was easier than fighting to be seen. Now, sitting across from them in my own home, I realized Savannah's words were just another version of that same dismissal. I set my mug down, the sound steady, decisive. "You think I've never struggled?" I said, my voice calm, though my chest burned. "You think this house fell into my lap?" Beau shifted in his chair, uneasy. I leaned forward, eyes fixed on him. "I already know about the foreclosure. My realtor told me last week. She didn't realize the property belonged to you when she mentioned it. So don't come here pretending I don't understand struggle." The air went still. Savannah's lips parted, searching for words. My mother blinked once, twice, like I'd spoken in a language she couldn't translate. And Beau? He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, not the shadow that trailed behind him, but the man who now held the upper hand. The invisible sun had just reminded them he wasn't invisible anymore. The sun dipped low, streaking the horizon with orange and violet, casting long shadows across the porch. Inside, the air felt dense, thick with unspoken fury and disbelief. After my words, no one moved for a long moment. Then my mother's voice cut the silence, brittle and sharp. "You always make things difficult, Torin. This is family. Why do you insist on being selfish?" Bo leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "We're only asking for a few months. You've got empty rooms everywhere. It's not like you need all this space." Savannah's voice chimed in softer but calculated. "You live here alone. Sharing wouldn't even make a difference to you. But to us, it would change everything." Their words landed like commands dressed up as pleas. Once I would have nodded, swallowed the resentment, convinced myself that silence was the safer path. But I wasn't that boy anymore. The years of hand-me-downs and leftover cakes, the crushed dreams and ignored efforts, they had hardened into something stronger. I stood slowly, letting the legs of the chair scrape against the wood floor. Their eyes followed me, confusion flickering. I gestured for them to stand. "Come with me." They exchanged wary glances but rose. I led them down the hallway, the soft lights casting shadows across the pale wood floors I had sanded myself. I stopped at the first door, opened it wide. The room was simple, a bed with plain linens, a chair, nothing more. "This is the guest room. You can stay here tonight." That's all. Their faces shifted, surprise mingled with disbelief. I moved to the next door, opened it just as deliberately. "And this is for you, Mother. Also temporary." I turned in the narrow hallway, facing them both. My voice was level, unshaken. "From this moment on, don't mistake your presence here for ownership. This isn't your house. It's not Bo's, it's not yours, Mother. This is mine." Lorraine's lips curved into a cold smile. She tilted her head, voice dripping with mock amusement. "Don't forget your father's estate was meant for the family. You really think this place is only yours?" Her words hit like a dagger, carefully chosen to reopen old doubts. But beneath her tone, I heard fear. She believed the lie she had repeated for years, that my life was theirs to dictate. She didn't know what I held in reserve. I inhaled, steadying myself. My father hadn't left everything tangled in the family trust. Years ago, he had handed me something privately, something I had never revealed. A separate agreement written and signed in his slanted hand. Proof that he had seen me even when no one else did. I didn't show it now. Not yet. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone. The screen lit up against the dim hallway light. My thumb hovered over a familiar number already pulled up in my contacts. I typed a short message. "Come to the house tonight. There's something we need to settle." Then I slid the phone back into my pocket, met their eyes, and smiled faintly. The rules have changed. The silence pressed in heavy as the last light of day faded behind the ocean. Inside me, the boy who once surrendered to scraps was gone. In his place stood a man who knew exactly where the lines were drawn and who was ready to defend them. The night had fallen heavy, the kind that made the ocean sound louder against the shore. Wind slipped through the cracks of the glass doors, rattling them lightly while the living room glowed with soft yellow light. We sat in a tense circle, the air between us brittle, ready to break with one wrong word. I poured the tea, the ritual steady, my hands controlled, though inside my chest there was a storm. "My house," I said evenly, setting a cup in front of each of them, "was bought by me, rebuilt by me. Not a cent from you, not a cent from Bo. Everything here came from my work." Bo let out a sharp laugh, leaning back in his chair like he'd been waiting for that opening. "Everyone knows Dad left the assets to Mom. You just lucked out. You're nothing but the kid who stumbled into a free ride." His words sliced through the quiet. My mother nodded in agreement, her lips pressed tight, her approval of Bo's version of the story ringing louder than anything she could have said. I set my cup down and rose. They followed me with their eyes as I crossed the room to the old cabinet by the wall. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out a thick, weathered envelope. Its edges were worn soft with time, the flap yellowed the paper, carrying years of silence. I returned to the table, placed it flat on the wood between us, and said quietly, "This is something you've never known." The weight of it dragged me backward to the night I first received it. I was 20 years old, working 3 jobs, signing papers for a dingy apartment on the far side of town. I'd just come home from a shift, exhausted, grease still on my hands from the diner. My father had been waiting in the kitchen, the light dim. He pressed this envelope into my hands without explanation, just his voice low and certain. "Keep this, son. Someday you'll understand." I had never opened it in front of anyone. I had kept it tucked away as if my silence would guard it better than locks. Now I brushed my fingers across the flap but didn't open it yet. "If you keep denying my place here," I said softly, "I will read this aloud to everyone." The quiet that followed was so deep I could hear the surf hit the pilings under the house. My mother scoffed, her tone sharp. "That's just nonsense. Your father never did anything behind my back." She said it fast, too fast, her hands trembling just slightly in her lap. Savannah, usually so quick with her remarks, said nothing. Her eyes darted to the envelope, a flicker of doubt on her face. It was then that Margot padded into the room, clutching her stuffed dolphin. She climbed onto the edge of the sofa, her small eyes curious. "Uncle Torin, what's in that?" she asked, pointing at the envelope with the open honesty only a child carries. I smiled, reached out and smoothed her hair back. "Something that protects this house," I told her, keeping my voice calm, reassuring. Before anyone could respond, the doorbell rang. Its chime cut through the tension like a knife. I stood, walked to the door and pulled it open. A man stood there, professional and detached, holding a clipboard under one arm. "Good evening," he said. "I'm Mr. Keaton from the city. There's been a request to verify ownership records. May I come in?" I stepped aside, gesturing him in. His presence shifted the air at once. As he entered, I turned back to face my family. My gaze was steady, my voice even. So I said, letting the words settle into the heavy room, "Are you still sure this house isn't mine?" The wind pressed harder against the windows, the sound of the ocean growing restless outside. Inside, the light glowed golden, reflecting off the glass table where the envelope still lay. "Mr. Keaton set his clipboard down with careful precision, flipping through a folder of documents. The tension in the room seemed to lean toward him, every breath drawn in anticipation. "According to the city records," he said, adjusting his glasses, "the sole legal owner of this property is Torin Locke Merrick. All taxes, deeds, and transfer filings list his name exclusively." Bo shot up from his chair so fast it scraped loudly against the wood floor. His voice broke the room. "That's impossible. My father promised me this place. He said it was supposed to be mine." I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at him, then at the envelope on the table. Slowly, deliberately, I picked it up, broke the seal, and slid out the folded papers within. The paper crackled under my fingers, the sound almost ceremonial. I laid it down so they could all see. It was a separate agreement signed in my father's hand, bearing a notary's seal. Proof. My mother's hands shook as she leaned forward, her face pale. "Elliot would never have done anything behind me," she whispered, though her voice carried more fear than certainty. I opened the letter, tucked inside the handwriting, instantly familiar, angled. Precise, my father's voice on paper. I read aloud, "Torin, you carried the weight none of them noticed. This home is not a reward. It is a refuge. It belongs to you because you never asked for anything and gave everything. May it protect you when I cannot." The words hung in the air, and for once no one interrupted. The silence was thick, not with denial, but with the collapse of their certainty. Then the door opened again, and another figure stepped inside. Hollis Crane, my attorney, walked in with the calm authority that always accompanied her. She carried a neat stack of documents and placed them on the table beside the city folder. "These," she said, her voice even, "are notarized copies of the agreement along with certified ownership records. They leave no room for argument." Bo stood rigid, his chest heaving. My mother stared at the table, her lips trembling, her hand pressed against her necklace like it might anchor her. Savannah stayed quiet, her eyes flickering between me and the papers, as if realizing that whatever game they thought they could play was already lost. I sat back, slowly lifted my chipped teal mug to my lips, and took a measured sip of tea. Its warmth spread through me, steady and grounding. For years, silence had been my shield, my way of surviving. Tonight, that silence had turned into something else, a language of evidence, of signatures and seals of words my father left behind that no one could erase. The room was bright with lamplight, but it was brighter still with truth. And for the first time in my life, the weight of proof was on my side. The papers lay on the table in plain sight, my father's handwriting visible, the notary's seal shining under the lamp. Hollis Crane's calm voice still lingered in the air, but the silence that followed was short-lived. Bo let out a bitter laugh, low and sharp, and leaned forward, his jaw tight. "You always wanted to take what was mine. You think you're better than me now because you've got some paper with Dad's name on it." His voice rose with every word until he lunged forward, hand reaching across the table. He tried to grab the letter, the deed, anything he could tear apart. But in his clumsy anger, he caught the edge of an old frame sitting at the corner of the shelf. It toppled, glass shattering across the hardwood floor. The photo inside slid out face up in the shards. I recognized it instantly. I was 9 years old in that picture, swallowed by one of Bo's discarded sweaters, the sleeves too long, the wool scratching against my skin. My mother had snapped the photo, calling it resourceful. I had smiled faintly in it because back then, smiling was safer than letting them see me ache. The sight of it on the floor was like a blade reopening scars. For a second, the room blurred. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I knelt, picked up the picture, carefully brushed the glass away, and slid the frame back together. Then from the wooden backing, I pulled out a small brass key. Its edges were worn smooth with time, heavy in my palm. I held it up, my voice steady. Dad gave me this key when I was 17. He told me, for later. Tonight I finally understand what he meant. The weight of the key in my hand was more than metal. It was history. It was trust. It was proof that I had been seen even when everyone else pretended I wasn't there. My mother's expression shifted. For the first time that night, her anger cracked into desperation. She stood and reached toward me. "Torin, please. Don't do this. Think about Margot. She needs her grandmother. She needs her family." I looked at the little girl sitting small in the corner, clutching her dolphin so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her eyes were wide, frightened, caught in the storm she never asked for. I crouched down and softened my voice. "Family doesn't mean taking what isn't yours," I said. "It doesn't mean breaking someone else to make yourself whole." Margot's eyes filled with tears, and she hugged her dolphin tighter. My words weren't for my mother. They were for her. A heavy knock rattled the door. Everyone froze. I set the key on the table and went to open it. Officer Burke stood on the porch, hat pulled low, clipboard in hand, the night air curling around him. His eyes swept over the tense faces inside. "There's been a report of a disturbance," he said. "I'm here to assess what's going on." The room stiffened with his presence, the fragile mask my family wore beginning to crumble completely. Inside, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about words anymore. The fight had moved into the open, and there would be no turning back. It was near midnight, the waves outside hammering the shore with relentless force. The air pressed cold against the windows, carrying the tang of salt. Inside, the living room burned with light. Officer Burke stood near the door, arms crossed, his gaze firm. Hollis Crane was at my side, her stack of documents untouched on the table but more powerful than any weapon. He cleared his throat and spoke with authority. "All records confirm that this property belongs solely to Torin Locke Merrick. If there are any further disputes or disturbances tonight, I'll have no choice but to remove you." Bo's chest rose and fell like he was about to explode. He snarled, "I'm not walking out of here with nothing." He grabbed the nearest cup from the coffee table and hurled it to the floor. Glass shattered shards, scattering like stars across the hardwood. The sound cracked through the night like gunfire. Margot screamed and began to sob, burying her face in her dolphin. I moved quickly, but not in anger. I knelt beside her, pulled her into my arms, and whispered against her hair, "You're safe. Don't worry. This is your uncle's house. No one can take that away from you." She trembled against me, but slowly her sobs eased. Holding her there in front of everyone drew the line clear as daylight. This was my home. and I was the one who made it safe. My mother's face twisted, reaching for one last weapon. If it weren't for me, you'd have never made it this far. I put a roof over your head, I fed you, I clothed you. Her voice cracked with the effort to hold power she no longer had. I stood still holding Margot's hand. My voice was calm but sharp enough to cut. You fed me with scraps, clothed me with what Bo no longer wanted, and raised me in silence that told me I was nothing. I survived because I worked, because I fought, because I believed in something more than being your afterthought. This house is not proof of your care. It's proof that I built myself despite you. Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Hollis reached into her folder, pulled out one final document, and slid it toward me. Torin, this is a trespass notice. If you sign it, they lose all rights to enter this property. Permanently. It's your choice. I looked at my mother. I looked at Bo. Rage still etched into his face, his fists clenched at his sides. And then I said, steady as stone, "This isn't your house. It never was, and it never will be. Don't confuse presence with ownership. You have no claim here anymore." The words fell like iron. Outside, the wind howled against the porch, rattling the boards, the waves crashing like drums of war. Inside, I stood tall for the first time in my life, not shrinking, not silent, not bending under the weight of their demands. I didn't need to shout. My silence had hardened into steel, and that was enough to make them step back. For once, it wasn't me yielding. It was them. The night dragged deeper into itself, the kind of stillness that makes every sound sharper. The clock ticked faintly in the corner, the lamps cast their golden glow, and yet the air in the room felt colder than the ocean outside. Officer Burke shifted toward the door, and Hollis Crane stacked her papers neatly, both ready to leave. But I raised my hand. "Stay a moment longer," I said quietly. "There's still something left." I turned back to my mother and Bo, their faces set in hard lines, their eyes flashing with the same disdain I'd lived with my entire life. From under the table, I pulled out another envelope thinner than the first, but no less heavy. I laid it flat before them. "This one is mine," I said. "Not from my father, not from the city. Mine." I slid the contents across the table, photos of me at 19 in the pale light of a gas station where I worked nights. My uniform was oil-stained, my face gaunt, eyes hollowed by exhaustion. Alongside them, the copies of receipts, rent checks, and loan payments that had built the foundation of my first apartment. Evidence that I had kept myself alive when no one else cared to notice. "You think I've lived off luck," I said, my voice steady. "At 12, you handed me a half-eaten cake and called it a birthday. At 16, you shut the door on my chance to go to college prep. At 19, you erased my name from the project I started so Bo could take the credit. You've built your version of family by scraping me down to nothing. And I carried it year after year quietly, as though silence made it less cruel." The words fell like blows. Each memory, each scar I placed on the table like evidence in a courtroom. Their shoulders shifted uncomfortably under the weight of it. "You call it love," I said finally, letting the words sink into the air. "But for me, it was hell, and I've been silent too long." My mother shot to her feet, her composure shattering. Her voice cracked through the house, sharp and raw. "If it weren't for me, you wouldn't even exist." I rose too, but slowly, calmly, and I met her eyes. "If it weren't for me learning how to survive on my own, I wouldn't have lived to see this night. You exist on my birth certificate. I exist because of my own hands." Her mouth trembled, but no sound came. It was Hollis who broke the silence, sliding a document across the table. "You have a choice, Torin. You can sign the trespass notice. From tonight forward, they won't have the right to step inside this house without your consent. Whether you choose that path is up to you." I glanced toward Margot, sitting small in the corner, her dolphin clutched tight against her chest, her eyes round with fear and confusion. She had heard every word. My throat tightened. I didn't want her to grow up believing that love was silence, that family meant surrender. I took the pen Hollis held out. "I'll sign," I said. My voice was soft but unyielding. "Because from tonight my silence no longer means agreement. The pen scratched across the paper, and when I lifted it, the weight slid from my shoulders. Officer Burke took the document, his tone firm but not unkind. It's valid now. If they return here without your permission, it's a violation of the law. The words closed the air like a door slamming shut, final and unbreakable. For the first time in years, I felt a wall rise between us, not the wall they had built to shut me out, but the wall I had chosen to protect myself. The sky blushed pink before the sun rose, and the tide pulled quietly at the sand. The house smelled faintly of salt and old wood. By morning, it was just me and Margot. The noise was gone. No shuffling footsteps, no slammed doors, no sharp voices echoing down the hall. The quiet was not absence. It was presence of peace, of breath of belonging. I stepped onto the porch with my chipped teal mug in hand, steam long gone, but the porcelain still warm against my palm. I lifted it slowly, breathing in the briny air, and whispered to myself, "This quiet is finally mine." The sliding door creaked and Margot bounded out in her pajamas, her hair messy from sleep, clutching a sheet of purple paper. "Look, Uncle Torin," she said breathlessly, shoving it into my hands. On the page was her drawing, the beach house in bright crayon strokes, yellow walls, and a blue roof, windows shaped like hearts. And next to the house, glued carefully, was the little brass key I had pulled from the broken frame the night before. Underneath, in her uneven letters, she had written, "Thank you, Uncle Torin. This is your house and mine too." The breath caught in my throat. The key had once symbolized escape, a way out of the house I never belonged in. Now it meant something else entirely, the right to choose who I let in, the power to decide what family would mean from here on. As I held the drawing, a shadow passed across the porch. It was Mr. Ingram, my neighbor, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one with a small smile. "Heard the noise last night," he said quietly. "Word travels fast. Seems Beau's under investigation for fraud. And your mother's request for financial assistance just got flagged. Numbers didn't add up." I nodded once, not out of glee, but of release. That storm isn't mine to carry anymore. He patted my shoulder and left. I watched him go, then looked down at Margot, who had settled cross-legged on the porch beside me, coloring the ocean into her drawing. She was humming soft and distracted, as if last night had already begun to fade. Inside, I felt the truth settle with a clarity I had never known. She would grow up knowing that love was not measured in how much you could endure, but in how much you were valued. I walked back inside, pulled down the old frame from the shelf, and slid her drawing into it. The photo of me as a boy in Beau's sweater was gone now, replaced by a vision of something new. Hope scribbled in crayons, a house made of hearts, a key placed not as an exit but as a welcome. For the first time, the frame wasn't a weight of memory. It was a marker of a beginning. I stepped back onto the porch, sat with Margot, and looked out at the horizon where the sun had just lifted clear of the water. The waves crashed, steady, endless, but they no longer sounded like chaos. They sounded like rhythm. They sounded like choice. They called it love. I murmured the words, almost carried away by the breeze. But it was hell. And now I've chosen to write a new meaning for family. The ocean answered in its ceaseless roll, and I let the morning wrap itself around me. For the first time in my life, I was seen. When I look back at everything that unfolded, it still feels unreal. For years, silence was my survival. I thought keeping my head down, swallowing pain, and pretending scraps were enough was the only way to be loved. I told myself that family was supposed to hurt sometimes, that I was lucky to have a roof, even if it leaked, lucky to wear hand-me-downs, even if they didn't fit, lucky to eat what was left, even if it wasn't meant for me. But what I've learned is this silence only protected the ones who benefited from my absence. The night my family tried to take my home, I realized I wasn't a boy anymore, waiting for permission to belong. I had built something real, something no one could erase. And when I finally said no, when I finally chose myself, it wasn't anger that gave me strength. It was clarity. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to beg. I only needed to stand steady and unshaken and remind them that I existed, that I had always existed. Family is not about obligation. It is not about how much of yourself you can sacrifice for someone else's comfort. Real family is respect, protection, choice. And sometimes family is the people we let in after the storm has passed, the ones who don't demand but who show up simply to stand with us. So if my story reached you, if you've ever felt invisible in the place that was supposed to protect you, know that you are not alone. You are not broken for wanting more, and you are not selfish for choosing peace over chaos. Before you leave, I'd love for you to leave a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're from. Sometimes the smallest hello reminds me that my voice doesn't vanish into the void, that it's heard, that it matters. And if you felt even a fraction of your own life in mine, please subscribe to this channel. Your presence here tells me that stories like ours deserve space, deserve to be seen, deserve to be told without shame. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me put words to years of silence. The boy I once was never thought anyone would hear him. But today, because of you, he finally has.